It's time for this week's episode of Brandon Sports Talk, featuring in-depth interviews from those who are trending in the world of athletics.
Hey, if this would have been last night,
Welcome back to
go ahead.
Brandon Sports Talk. In today's episode, I have the privilege to interview the Clemson Tigers fan fat fun fans podcast with James and Bailey. How are you doing today?
Doing great, Brandon. How are you?
I'm doing good.
I'm great, Brandon. Glad to be here.
Thank you. Of course, James, can you talk about how y'all knew that y'all wanted to start a podcast doing sports for fans?
So, yeah, the idea for starting a podcast, I was actually looking for a way to start a business, and I knew that whether I generated a lot of revenue or not, I would be able to write some items off on my taxes, at least at first. And so maybe the federal government is listening, maybe they're not, hopefully, but I didn't do anything illegal. I followed all the rules. I did the research, and I was willing to put the time into it if it was going to help me, monetarily, whether upfront or on the back end on my taxes. And, you got to be legit. So I did everything legit, kept up with stuff, but I was able to write off things that I was going to spend my money on anyway, going to Clemson games, being a fan, going out to eat, to watch away games on TV and that type thing. And at the same time, really didn't know how much we would enjoy doing the podcast, because when we started, it was just me, and I tailgate with Bailey, and we were talking about it, and he said, "Hey, you need to have me on as a guest." So I had him on as a guest. And the difference in those two shows with just me and then with me and Bailey was like 1,000 times better. And it just snowballed from there, where we were just doing it together all the time. That was in August. By January, we were doing, well, when they started announcing the poll in the middle of the week, we started doing a second one in the middle of the week. And then in January, we went to video, and it's just kept growing from there. So, and it's been really fun. That's the thing is that kind of kept us going, I guess, and one reason I picked this is because I did feel like there's no end to the content when you can just sit here with one of your friends and talk about Clemson athletics, or really athletics in general,
or anything else for that matter.
Yeah.
Of course, Bailey, how did y'all know that y'all wanted to do Clemson Tigers?
Well, we are both Clemson graduates. We go back to the early 90s, I guess, at Clemson University, and we've been friends ever since. And so when James, it was only logical that we covered Clemson. So we started this thing as kind of like a fun look at people tailgating and the experience of being a college football fan. And it's kind of, I guess it's kind of grown into a kind of a little variety show, and it just depends on what's going on that week, who we have on, and what we talk about.
Of course, James, when it comes to covering Clemson Tigers, do you only cover the main sports like football and men's basketball, or do you cover all sports for Clemson?
Well, we do not cover all sports, but it would depend on what people consider the main sports. I guess you could say we definitely had to. We didn't know if we would keep going after football season, and it was just too easy with basketball, and then baseball started up, and we have a
softball,
really good girls softball team that made it easy. And then, but when Clemson, if there was an accomplishment, we would try to make sure we pointed that out. The
don't
track
forget
and
cheerleading.
field. Yeah, and see, Bailey's daughter is a cheerleader, so we probably covered more cheerleading than any other college podcast in the country, and they went to nationals and all this kind of stuff. So we definitely talked about that. But when the track and field won the ACC, we shout out for that. If nothing else, we didn't really give anything other than a report. We talked about a women's golf team. They did really well, but we didn't hear a lot about the men's golf. So we didn't say a lot about, or anything really about the men's golf. So we did not cover every sport, but definitely the big sports and definitely any sport that was reaching, the conference championship type status or anything on the national level for sure.
Of course, Bailey, what has that been like, obviously getting to cover those sports that obviously aren't just your football and your men's basketball for Clemson?
Well, like James said a minute ago, obviously I have a personal connection to cheerleading because my daughter is a Clemson cheerleader. And then we've had on the head cheer coach, we've had on a softball player, we've had on kids that in my line of work, I work at a high school here. We've had several kids on there that one kicks in the USFL now and was drafted by the Steelers, kicked at Wake Forest. So I like covering all of it. I like talking to all of them, and we've talked to walk-ons, we've talked to good players, we've talked to former NFL players. So it's fun.
Of course, James, what are some of the topics that you cover on your Clemson Tigers podcast?
I'm sorry, top what?
What are some of the topics that you cover?
Oh, topics. So, okay. So like Bailey said earlier, our podcast is probably only about 1/3 actually covering sports and 1/3 talking about sports related stuff. And a third, just, it's almost like a variety show. When we first started in the fall, we had a segment, it was just audio back then. So you can find us on Spotify and all the other podcasting platforms. But we had a segment every week about Porta Johns, and it was a story about what the Porta Johns were like. Bailey went to a Wake Forest game, and so what was the Porta Johns? Because as a tailgater, the Porta John situation is always a very important. That's a very important part of the tailgate. So where the Porta Johns going to be, and I have teenage daughters though, and they kind of made us do away with that. I think they were embarrassed maybe or something. So we've done that. We had our own right around the NFL draft. We had our own version of the tailgate menu draft where between the two of us, we have 5 kids. And so we went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and had them pick the menu item they would choose on the tailgates. So like Bailey's son picked Bojangles chicken tenders or something, and my daughter picked wings. Yeah. So, we're doing stuff like that. In addition to just, we're trying to entertain. Sometimes either if it's good, I miss my calling, but if it's not, then it's good that, only.
Well, and we just did a 4th of July tips segment.
Yeah, we do a lot of countdowns, inspiration from, the old David Letterman days. So yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, Bailey, what is that like, obviously getting to cover Clemson on those away games, going to like NC State, Wake Forest?
Well, it's great because I want to be there anyway. I'm going to go support Clemson University, and really, James will tell you, I watch every basketball game, whether I'm there or not, on television. Watched a ton of baseball. So it's something I'm going to do anyway, and I can certainly talk about it as much as anybody wants to. But yeah, it's fun. Yeah, I mean, going to Wake Forest, the Porta John scene at Wake Forest, they were numbered, so you never got lost. And Wake Forest was a tight game. It was a great game, so it was fun to go up there and do that. And it's next year I think I might end up going to Syracuse because maybe my daughter's cheering at Syracuse. Don't know yet, but we'll see. It's always a good time though.
Of course, James, who are some of the people that you've had the privilege of interviewing?
So I think to me, the most impressive, if you would have told me, a year or two ago that, hey, you're going to have a podcast and you're going to be able to interview this guy, I would have said there's no way. And that's Woody Dantzler. And people, that was back in our audio only days. So you can find that one once again on Spotify. And I'm trying to work out a schedule where we can get him back on video. But any sports, you don't have to be a Clemson fan to recognize the name Woody Dantzler. I mean, the first person to ever rush for 1,000 yards and throw for 2,000 yards in NCAA history in a season. I mean, he was just ahead of his time. He was an electric player, and the interview was unbelievable as well. He's a very inspirational gentleman, and just it was a great interview, and he's a great guy. And just the thought of, you watch him on the YouTube videos, and it's just like, man, I can't believe this guy is was on my podcast. And I mean, I've got his number now, so every once in a while I'll just text him, and he's extremely humble and extremely nice. It's just great.
Of course, Bailey, what was it like obviously getting to interview some former Clemson Tiger players like Ricky?
I mean, Ricky Sapp was great. I mean, you ought to see some of his dance moves. And
Yeah.
we've interviewed Grayson Marshall, who's the ACC leader in assists. Chris Whitney played in the NBA. Wayne Buckingham was a big time basketball player when we were there. And we just anybody we interview, or Nelson Welch was way back kicker for the Tigers, and I've known him through another situation. But it's just anybody we interview, we get something from them. We find out, what it's like to, like the kid, the Skiba that got drafted by the Steelers. What's that like, man? Like, what is it like to be drafted in the NFL? What's it like to play in the NFL? Or what's it like to be a walk-on at Clemson? That kind of thing. So it's been pretty cool.
Of course, what has that experience been like getting to hear those former players that were Clemson players share about their experience at Clemson?
Can I answer that part of that, James?
Yeah, definitely.
The coolest thing, and I'm being as perfectly honest as I can be, the coolest thing about everybody we talk to that plays at Clemson, and I've told my family this over and over and over, there is something special about Clemson University, and you feel it when you get there. And every one of them, almost to a person, told us that on our podcast. So that's the coolest thing for me, because I already knew it.
And that's exactly what I was going to say. And whether it's basketball, football, whether they had Clemson in mind or it was at the bottom of their list until they came to visit, every single one of them says that when you get there, there's just something about Clemson. And, if all the Clemson people have seen it, and maybe some outside of Clemson people have seen it, on our shirts. It's on the back of my shirt right now. There's something in those hills, and that's the truth. And so I was going to say the exact same thing Bailey said, but there was one other thing that I learned, because we always ask people about their recruiting process. The other thing we ask is, what was your experience as a fan, because of what our podcast is about? If it's a football player, we'll say, were you able to go to basketball games or baseball games or whatever? And I never even thought about this, but like Buck, when we interviewed Buck and then we interviewed Grayson, it's like Buck couldn't go to stuff because he's 6'7", 6'9", whatever, and he stands out in a crowd. But Grayson, talking about Grayson Marshall, he's a guard. He's just right, a little over 6 foot, whatever, didn't necessarily stand out like Buck did. And he was going to baseball games and everything else. But I never thought that, those players, and they're too famous, I guess is one way to put it, to go and enjoy, a soccer game or a baseball game or whatever. Kind of hate it for them, but I never thought about that until we interviewed some of them, so that was pretty cool.
Of course, who are some of the people that you've had the privilege of interviewing?
Well, Bailey has named, he named so many. I'm sitting here thinking, man, I forgot about that one. So he's listed a lot of the Clemson folks. Another thing that I think's cool about our show is we've interviewed non-athletes. We've had a local entertainer kind of person, and he's also one of our sponsors, Jadu, on our show. But
he used to be the MC for the basketball.
Right. He was the MC for the basketball, throwing the t-shirts and that kind of thing. So we talked about that from a fan experience and that type thing. And our most recent show we had, which was a friend of mine, but we had a radio personality, a part of the 103.7 Country out of Charlotte morning, Tanner in the Morning show. Captain Jim Slade was on with us, and we had him on with us as like a professional critique. So as we went through the show, we were trying to get him to either pick on our show or make fun of how we were screwing up, or be he was sarcastically saying, "Oh, that's great. Y'all are like professionals." I mean, I'm assuming it was sarcastic because I'm sure we were not like professionals.
He was being serious.
Yeah. So those folks are very fun. Honestly, and I keep up with the analytics a little bit. I don't do a very good job, but we had a gentleman named Dean Cox who never played a down and never took a class at Clemson University, but he is known by every Clemson fan as the Hat. So, and he wears the orange cowboy hat with all the pins on it and whatnot. And he's at every, quote unquote, pretty much every Clemson athletic event that they have. And he's just a nice guy and everybody knows him, and he's known all around the upstate. He's a business owner across the upstate. So he knows a lot of people.
Didn't you give him a ride to the car dealership the other day?
I went by a coffee shop and he needed to go pick up his truck. So, that interview was great because it was just, three old Clemson fans sitting around talking, and it was just exchanging old war stories. But now he's friends with Dabo, so you got to go back, if you're listening, you got to go find our interview with the Hat and see how he got to be personal friends with Dabo. So that was pretty cool.
Of course, Bailey, what has that been like? Obviously, getting to interview current softball player Brooke that plays for Clemson.
Well, that was interesting because they had just, gotten through playing at Oklahoma, which, had the longest winning streak in the country, and Clemson had them down to 2 strikes with 2 outs twice. But yeah, she was great. I mean, she was down in Georgia, and, she's part of a very, very good softball program, a nationally ranked top 5 softball program. So we're just going to keep asking folks to be on here and on our podcast, and most of them don't mind. I mean, Nick Clayton, we just talked to him a couple weeks ago. He was a relief pitcher for Clemson, and he's probably getting ready to get drafted here in a week. So, and he's a kid that I've known for a couple of years. So my favorite guest of all time is my daughter, Clemson cheerleader, because she's my daughter. But yeah, it's been fun, and Brooke was great.
Of course, Bailey, how do you go about getting some of the guests that you've had on for the Clemson podcast?
Well, you don't ask, and you don't know until you ask. And James does a great job of doing that. And I just basically, my role is to show up on Sunday nights with a little bit of research, and he's already lined up all that. So he could probably, through social media, he reaches out to a lot of folks.
Of course,
Bailey,
James,
I reach out to people we don't know. Bailey kind of had a long list of folks he already knows. He was able to get Nelson Welch and the cheer coach and Nick Clayton and a few
Nick
other
Skiba
folks
and Jalen Lane and
right. Bailey's kind of a big deal over in Clover,
Blackman
South Carolina.
Huckabee.
Of course, James, who are some of the people that you are looking to interview in the future as Clemson?
Well, we are actually going to help, speaking of Wayne Buckingham, we're helping Buck with a fundraiser coming up in August, and he is going to have Dale Davis, Eldon Campbell. I'm drawing a complete blank, Bailey. Help me out here. Perry Tuttle. I mean, he's going to, Danny Ford. He's going to have the big names of big names at this fundraiser, and that's part of the deal. People buy a ticket, and they can rub elbows with these guys and whatnot. And I'm hoping to get now, and not to belittle, he's already helped us get Grayson Marshall and Chris Whitney, but I'm hoping that we can get the keynote speaker is Levon Kirkland. If we can get Levon Kirkland on our show, really anytime between now and the fundraiser in August or even afterwards, that will be, I mean, that guy was a beast back in the day.
And we'll talk to all of them. I mean, we'll sit there that weekend and say, "Hey, your slots. It's time for your slot," and we'll talk to them and record it and have a big time.
Yeah, we're not very shy.
Of course. Who is y'all's dream interview for a Clemson Tigers player? Starting off with you, Bailey.
Oh boy! Wow. I'm gonna go with Trevor Lawrence and maybe Travis Etienne. It'd be a home run if we got them both on at the same time.
Yeah.
James?
Yeah, that would be good. Those guys are very recent. I'd love to get anybody from we had somebody from the national championship team, but I'd love to get Perry Tuttle. I just remember, or Steve Fuller, that those names, I grew up with those names. And to me, they're just icons for sure. Or, like I said, I'd stick with Levon Kirkland as good as anybody. Or
I mean,
wait a
go
minute,
ahead.
I'm back up. Oh man, it was on the tip of my tongue. The receiver caught the touchdown against Alabama.
Hunter Renfro.
Hunter Renfro. That's it. That would be the dream interview, Hunter Renfro.
Well, I mean, let's be honest. If we could get Dabo on here, we'd be doing all right too. I mean, there's probably an appearance fee for him.
Yeah, Brandon asked for players though, so yeah.
I
But
know.
you're right, Dabo.
Of course, what is something that y'all both learned now that y'all didn't know before covering a sports fan podcast? Starting off with you, Bailey.
What is something we learned that we didn't know? That people are just willing to get on here and talk to us for about 30 minutes or 10 or 15 minutes. Like we kind of hit a home run when we got Woody Dantzler. Like that was our first like really big known name. Like before that, we had gotten some good players on there and some guys that I knew and things like that. But when we got Woody Dantzler, you can tell people, hey, Woody Dantzler was on our show last week. Would you like to be on this Sunday night? And they'll just do it. Like it's great.
James.
Yeah, I didn't know, and it's twofold. And Brandon, you do this, so you'll understand what I mean. I think I didn't know how easy it was to record, whether it's audio or video, but then how time consuming it is to actually get it out there. And Brandon, if you get what I mean, I think, because it's literally as easy as having an app or having a software and clicking a button and boom, you can make a show. But then there's at least an hour, 2 hours of getting the show where you want it to be, after you have finished. So I never would have thought that I spend too much time on social media, but it's not just scrolling around. It's posting stuff and trying to promote the show.
And you are the executive producer. That's why you have that title.
Yeah.
Of course, what are some of y'all's future plans with the podcast moving forward?
Well, James mentioned the event in August at Clemson. That's like a weekend event, which we'll figure out. We haven't completely decided how much we're going to be involved in or how much we're not going to be involved in, that kind of thing. But hey, football season's right around the corner, and I'm just thinking out loud. I like the Dave Letterman top 10 list idea every week. Well, I mean, all good ideas were stolen from somebody who had them to begin with. So
that's right.
We'll keep trying to make it better. I mean, we're on TV a little bit now, and we're trying to grow this thing. So we'll see what happens.
James, what are some of y'all's future plans?
I plan, and this is once again my daughters and my wife, they roll their eyes, but the great thing about this is now, like I said, I'm going to Clemson games anyway, so I can purposefully make my tailgate more fun, even more fun, and maybe semi outlandish, but then that'll just be better podcast material. And I don't want to give away any of the ideas or all of them, but let's just say there might be a disco ball at the tailgate, so which automatically rolls into content for the Fun Fans podcast. It just it's just one hand washes the other. So and hopefully we'll just keep getting people's attention, and people will realize, I do want people to realize we are centered around Clemson, and it might be hard to watch for Carolina, South Carolina fans or some other rival, but I think what we do is entertaining to pretty much anybody, and especially any sports fan. So that's kind of the goal, is to just keep doing what we're doing, but maybe make it even a little more noticeable, and hopefully like we got your attention, and hopefully we'll just keep getting people's attention, and eventually it'll be a semi-retirement plan or
And
not.
most importantly, it's fun for us.
Yeah, it's fun. Like I say, it's just fun.
We like doing it.
Yeah.
What advice would you give those people that are looking to start a sports podcast dealing with college sports as a fan?
I would say go for it. It's too easy to do. Like, it's easy. And you can do it. And people will say, well, why, you're on a podcast? You're doing a podcast? And I just tell them, yeah, we're on a podcast every week. You know, here's the TV link if you want to watch us on television. So, yeah, go for it.
James?
Yeah, I
Any
would say the
advice?
same thing. Yeah, I would say the same thing. And I would say, you know, don't try to get outside of whatever is fun for you. You know, if we're Clemson fans, and that's why our podcast, even though like I said, I think it's entertaining for everybody. It is centered around Clemson for the most part, and that's what keeps it interesting and fun for us. Bailey's research is pretty easy because it's going to be centered around Clemson or some other sport that he's already paying attention to. So I would say keep it fun, keep it simple, especially at the beginning. And really, just like anything else in life, don't try to do it by yourself. And that, whether that's on the show, like having a co-host, or outside of that, there are a lot of folks like yourself, Brandon, and then us, and we're part of the Fanboys, Fangirls Podcast Network. And one of the main things that those networks do is just share each other's shows, share each other's information, gets the word out there. So don't try to say, okay, I've got this little gem, and keep it to yourself. Listen to other people's ideas, and also share the things you learn as you go. And don't spend a lot of money right off the bat. I mean, I wouldn't do that, but it's not that difficult. I mean, and we've been doing this almost a year now, and on podcasting equipment and software, I don't know that we've spent $200 or $300. So, I mean, I would not go out and spend a ton of money for sure.
That's great.
Yeah, but
advice.
you got to have a cool mic.
At least a
Now,
microphone.
Brandon, I would also tell people just to stay in their lane, meaning don't try to be ESPN. Don't try to be a guy who played in the NFL for 12 years talking about breaking down a defense that they saw on Saturday at a college game. Just stay in your lane. Like, those guys on ESPN are experts. They're on there for a reason. I would just, like James said, do what you do, have fun, do what you want to do. It's your podcast.
Right.
That's great. That's great advice. Where can my listeners find your podcast at on social media and podcast platforms?
So I think we're fairly easy to find on almost any social media. We are at Fun Fans Podcast, and that's TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We're also on, James Dillard. I'm not that hard to find on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And I think my name and Fun Fans is on there, so it's not that hard to find. And we're also on, like I said, our podcast. Even since we've started video, we have a YouTube channel, Fun Fans Podcast, once again. But the audio is on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google, iHeartRadio podcast. We're out there. We've got to be the easiest people in the world to find. And we got a cool little Bitmoji that you'll be able to tell. If you see me and Bailey and you see that Bitmoji, the two little ball guys on top of the words that say Fun Fan Podcast. And like Bailey's mentioned, we're channel 24 on WSBN TV streaming television. So you can use the Boxcast app to put it on your TV and find WSBN TV channel 24, or stream it on your computer. So we're all over the place.
We out there.
And thank you again, James and Bailey, for your interview, and best of luck in your future with the Clemson Tigers Fun Fan Podcast.
Thank you, Brandon. Thanks for having us on.
Thank you. You can find Brandon Sports Talk on Instagram at Brandon Sports Talk, Twitter at @talk_Brandon, and you can find me on YouTube at Brandon Sports Talk. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you again, James and Bailey, for your interview, and best of luck in your future.
You've been watching Brandon Sports Talk. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to Brandon Sports Talk on social media, and on YouTube.